my pastor asked me the other day, what I thought about the priests when they were going into the Holy of Holies, because our Christian belief is that they had a rope tied around them, and that there were bells in the bottoms of their garments, and that if the bell stopped ringing, the assumption was the person died and they had to be drugged back out. Also brought up to me, so I was looking into it. So this veil, 30 foot wide, 60 foot long, 4 inches thick. Hard to imagine how heavy that is. But the priest is supposed to open it without having an opening for them to get in through. Both of his hands are full. And only the priest is allowed to be there, so he couldn't have any help getting in. And if he wasn't right when he went in, he would die.
Yes.
So,
as we previously stated.
Yes. The thought that was brought up to him, that was told to him, because there's a replica of the temple somewhere in Missouri. I can't remember exactly where it's at, but somewhere in Missouri. And there happened to be a rabbi standing there. And it made it more led to believe that if the priest walked up and was right, he was transfigured through the curtain into the Holy of Holies. And I don't know if, Alex, if you have any more information on that, but that's kind of something different. You don't think about people on a normal yearly basis being transfigured, and it was, like I said, it's not been brought up to us that way. We were always led to believe that the man made it in there himself, and if he was right, he would die. Or if he wasn't right, he would die. But it's coming now more to believe that if he wasn't right, he would never make it in there in the first place.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think the last couple of weeks I kind of did a deep dive on the Mishkan, and despite what my podcast reveals about the Mishkan itself, essentially the Mishkan is an apartment for God in our world, right? And so God creates an apartment for us, and then we create an apartment for Him. So in God's apartment, like anybody's apartment, really, you don't just walk into someone's apartment and present yourself, right?
Right.
There's a knocking. There's a proverbial like, "Hey, how are you? Hi." There's some type of interaction at the doorway, and then you enter into the apartment, right? You don't just walk into somebody's apartment. Even your family, you don't really walk into their houses. In fact, I used to get in trouble when I just would open the door. My sister was like, one time, she's like, "Hey, stop walking into my house without first knocking." Not that it was that big of a deal, but that, it was just kind of, hey, like, just because I'm family doesn't mean you can roll up in here whenever. So anyway, I said all that to say that, so I do have a little bit of notes actually about this. So the high priest enters the Holy of Holies carefully by following the commandments given in the Torah, specifically Leviticus 16 regarding Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. So the process is washing holy garments, sacrificial preparations, incense offering, sprinkling of blood, and then exiting and completing the rituals. So he's bathed and dressed in special white linen and garments. He has a turban on his head. He has the breastplate on him. He's all decked out and got everything that he needs in order to be allowed into the Holy of Holies. And then he offers a bull. Later, he offers a goat. He offers a bull as a sin offering for himself and his household. Then, before entering the veil, he takes the burning coals from the altar, placed the incense on them inside of the Holy of Holies. This created a cloud of smoke that covered the Ark of the Covenant, shielding him from God's direct presence. So, there's a whole thing here. We see that in Leviticus 16, 12 through 13. There's a sprinkling of blood. He then sprinkles the blood of the bull. This is where it's first the bull, later the goat, representing the sins of Israel, on the mercy seat in front of the ark, which is Leviticus 16, 14 through 15. And then after completing the atonement process, he would leave, and the scapegoat he would send into the wilderness for Azazel and cleanse the altar and the people. The veil was a massive thick curtain separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies, as we know. Some Jewish commentary will suggest that it was so thick it takes multiple priests to manipulate it. But whether he goes between the curtains, if there actually were two, at some point people think there are two, so it may be easy to slip through those two curtains, or if he simply lifted a corner and entered, the Torah doesn't actually specify that. But here's where things get interesting. So these are the two possible methods I talked to you guys about the other day. Lifting the veil. Since the veil was a massive thick curtain, some believe the high priest carefully lifted a corner and stepped through to avoid unnecessary contact. Between two curtains, according to Jewish commentary, during the Second Temple period, there was actually two different veils butted up against each other. They separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. Obviously, the high priest would enter through the space between them and emerge on the other side into the Holy of Holies. This was to ensure an even greater reverence and separation. And then you have the supernatural theory, which is probably more of a rabbinic idea, as when you talk about the Talmud and you talk about Jewish commentary, there's a lot of things that go on there. Um, so the mystical tradition claimed that the high priest didn't physically move the veil, but that he was miraculously transported through it. This idea aligns with the sacred nature of the Holy of Holies and where the presence of God dwelt. Um, it becomes especially significant when we read that Yeshua's death, the veil was torn from the top to the bottom. This signifies that the access to God's presence was no longer limited to the high priest once a year, but open to all through Mashiach sacrifice.
Right.
So whether or not he lifted an edge, whether or not he was translated through, or whether or not he went between the curtains, we cannot tell. We don't know. The Torah is not specific on that. And I'm sure somewhere there's some rabbi that's given some type of ideology of this being a thing. However, my estimation is, and I try not to err on the side of mysticalism, but I do like one of my favorite preachers is Mark Morgan. And he actually was the first person I heard say that he had a rabbi tell him something very similar than what your pastor had said, Troy, where he was translated through the veil. Um, so I found that very interesting. One thing is for certain, I don't know, but what I will say is that you don't roll up on God any type of way. If you cannot make it into the Holy of Holies, you just didn't go in.
Okay.
And the other thing is, I think God understood that if the high priest was not accepted, he wouldn't have let him in anyway because he knows it's going to happen once you get in there.
Right.
And you don't want any dead bodies in there. So um, otherwise, he would just remove you. Like God can just fling you out of there. But only Israel actually isn't allowed into the tabernacle. Just the Kohen, the priesthood, are allowed into the tabernacle.
Right.
There's specific parts about the outer court that the Jews are allowed to go into, but not anyone is just allowed to go into the actual Mishkan without first becoming a Kohen, or a Kohen basically means priest, um, from the tribe of Levi. So if you're not from the tribe of Levi, you probably shouldn't be trying to enter into the Holy of Holies unless you're Antiochus Epiphanes and or the Antichrist. Those two cats did it, and they did it by the power of the enemy to symbolize, the coming Messiah who would basically come and save the world. So,
All right. So now, in my mind, I'm trying to look it up here on the side as you're talking.
mm-hmm.
For some reason, I always had the thought in my mind that the curtain for the Holy of Holies, the veil, was continuous and had no openings.
Mm-hmm.
It was completely continuous and had no way of opening it. Which is
Yeah,
what the significance of it being torn is why it's so great. And with that, that's kind of where my mind goes to the translation through it. Is because it's 4 inches thick.
yeah,
Just lifting up a corner and trying to go under, is going to be hard because, like I said, the priest is carrying the ash, and I can't remember what else, carrying whatever. But so both hands are full.
he would have had a bowl of blood and then ash.
Right.
So you're right. His hands certainly would have been full. But in order for him to get in there, um, yeah, he either had to set that down, but then do you grab it again? Like, what's the process there? You know what I mean?
Right.
You can't set a bowl of blood down and then so. But yeah, he takes the bowl of blood and he would have sprinkled the blood onto the mercy seat. It would have been licked up by the anointing power of
Right.
God, and then the sin of the camp would be passed over a year. So again, those things are the interesting thing. I without getting into too much trouble because I don't know who all watches this podcast, but I particularly would like to believe that he is translated through there.
Right.
But the Torah just does not say, and it's not a good thing to speak where the Torah doesn't speak. So it's very possible. I like that idea. It sounds mystical, and I like it. And but that doesn't mean that it's actually what happened. It's just as presented as I present things as I'm supposed to present them. It's Jewish fanfare, Jewish commentary that basically says, "Hey, yeah, he was translated through."
Yeah. I mean,
But I don't see. I mean, I don't see any other way either.
I
So
I see it less mystical, more on the lines that it almost seems a way of verification for those priests, that to verify that everything they'd done was right, as the people on the
yeah,
outside watching, if they could see at that point, if they could see the people on the outside watching, he just get translated into it.
he wants the. Sorry, he wants the food. Yeah, I mean, I that's the thing. Like, I don't see any other way either, and maybe it's not overly mystical either. But I just am very careful about. Well, if you're being loud, I'm very careful about what we see as far as the Mishnah is concerned, as far as the Talmud is concerned. The Torah does not specify how he got in there.
Yeah.
And so those commentaries are going to come from that oral tradition, as we know, as the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash, and these different Jewish commentaries. We got to be careful to share that stuff because we are basically speaking for God. It's like taking Mark Henry's word and saying, this is exactly how it happened. We don't know that. The rabbis don't know that. And so in some aspects there are good things when it comes to the Talmud. There are some decent ideas on it. Rav Suri and I have definitely agreed on that. However, we both also agree that there are points where Yeshua actually says, "You've made the traditions of men as if they are God, and they are not." And so he makes that very clear. So, but he doesn't say what traditions he's in agreement with and what traditions he's not in agreement with. And here's the other thing: the apostles also speak of some of those traditions, and they actually would allude more to them. So I think that is just prayer, understanding that God is not 100% mystical, but there probably are mystical aspects to him, that maybe aren't as crazy or out there as we think they are. So I hope that I'm saying everything right because what I don't want to do is I don't want to go like way off into left field and then get a phone
Right.
call saying like,
Well, I
"Hey,
mean,
you."
transfiguration is mentioned in the Bible, so at a few different places.
Yes,
It may not
yeah,
be specifically mentioned in this point, so that does not seem out of the realm of possibilities.
right,
So I mean, it's just one of those things that just trying to think, just trying to think about how pure you have to be, and basically you're walking up on the Holy of Holies. There can't be any doubt in your mind of whether you did everything perfect. So it kind of relates to our walk that we have now. As we're going through our life, we have to, as it says, to make your calling and election sure. So as we approach the end, making sure that we're perfect, so that way when the end comes and we have our transfiguration moment, because that's technically what's going to happen. We're going to be transfigured into the sky. I mean, I'm drawing that.
yeah. No, I
I'm
agree with
drawing
that.
that comparison. Is technically that's not the word that's used, but that is what is going to happen. But
Well,
you have
I
to make
think
sure 100% that your sacrifices are right and your life is right before you approach,
yeah.
or it is certain death.
Yeah, and that's only done by the blood too, right? So if you're going into that relationship with the Creator, there's always, you got to go through the blood first. um, which is, I mean, that's what the priest did, right?
Right.
It wasn't about how much sin you had. It wasn't about what wrongdoings you did. Um, for that time, you know, no matter, Moses killed people. It doesn't matter about that. What matters is that you have the blood applied. And that was the big thing. The high priest understood I have to come in this particular type of way to get into this space that God is in. And I think that what you're saying right there is a safe way to segue into how did they translated themselves through the blood to get to the other side of the veil.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful way to say that. I really like that. And if I get a phone call, we'll deal with that later. But no, I don't think I will. But again, I just don't want to over mysticize things. And I want to be careful about how much Talmudic things are being shared because so many people are running to these rabbis. They don't understand what these rabbis are talking about. And a lot of these rabbis, they might be giving good stuff, but they're very, very into Kabbalah. They're very into the occult. They're very into this mysticism. And you really, really want to be careful about what you're hearing from particular rabbis,
Right.
especially when we are on pulpits preaching the word of God to different people. I'm not saying, I think what we're doing is fine, but yeah, I just want to put that little plug in there. So,
Right.
but I like what you said, Troy. What you just said was really good.
I mean, and that's kind of, I don't know, the New Testament is always revealing the Old Testament, correct? That's what it's always
Yeah.
doing. And if you think about it as a fact that the New Testament reveals the Old Testament, the veil was torn so that all of us can have that transfiguration. It's just kind of, I mean, this is going through my head as I'm going because I had no prior thought of this until this right now. Is that the way the priest had to make sure he was perfect coming to the Holy of Holies is the way we need to approach the end. Working
Amen.
to be as perfect as we can and making sure the blood is applied so that way when it comes to that point in time, because now that we are all have access, we need to make sure that that blood is applied to us specifically so that way when that transfiguration happens, that time happens for us to go to the Holy of Holies, we can be transferred over to the other side.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I couldn't have even said it better myself. I think it's very important. The number one thing is having the blood applied, because again, some people think that um, they cannot, have a relationship with the King because of their sinful state. But let me just say this: He created you. He knows exactly where you're at. He knows exactly what you did. He's not worried about that. Let the blood wash over you and clean you.
Yeah.
And exactly what Troy said: apply the blood, move on, have that relationship with the King. Um, it's. I don't think anymore. It's about, um, you know, yes, can you do good? Yeah, but it's not works based. It's purely faith based. Your good faith leads you to have good works. So totally agree with you, Troy. Couldn't have said it better myself, man.
Any thoughts, Tyler?
You guys about nailed it. I have none on this subject. Not on this one. I just listened.
Well, just listened.
Yes.
I was trying to listen as well as I was going through because like I said I feel things were being revealed to me there as we were going because I hadn't had the thought process until this very second.
The only thing that popped up in my head was
What's the spirit?
you know how detail oriented that was, like down to the collar, the tassels, the bells, every single thing. Like Jesus described, or not Jesus, but God, Jesus described to the Israelites verbatim how to build the temple, how to put the temple, where to put everything, how they were supposed to do and orchestrate themselves to atone for their sins. But yeah, you really never are told how the high priest entered in through that veil. And I think, as you described, I'm just continuing echoing your point. It's a foreshadow of how the only way we are going to be able to get to God, to get to His Spirit, is by God and through, you know, his means. And it just goes to edify that point and drive it home further that, you know, you got that priest walked in there with the faith, believing that everything he did was on cue, on point, to be able to enter into his glory or his spirit.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even when you think about what Yeshua did, and um, um, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Hebrews talks about that. Hebrews actually says that Yeshua became the high priest.
Yeah.
But again, that's only after he sheds the blood
Yeah.
that he becomes the high priest. Before, he was still in the flesh. But once he raises from the dead, he's in that glorified state. The flesh no longer can glory because the flesh is gone. It's been destroyed.
Yep.
You know, so while we're in this imperfect state, I think I don't want to make light of sin, and I don't want to make it sound like, oh, hey, you can go sin and do whatever. But I also don't want to make it such a hefty weight that you can't ever have a good relationship with the King. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to sin. John actually tells us when you make a mistake, you have the mediator between God and man. And I think even Paul talks about him. But I don't think it's about not being perfect, because a lot of people think, well, I'm just not perfect. I'm not going to go have that relationship. But if we would stop being like that and be like a minor, and instead of looking at all the dirt, we would start looking at all the things that God wants to see within us. And we would start focusing on that stuff instead of focusing on our sin. I think we're going to have a way easier walk with Christ. And he had a great time. He laughed. He had food. There was a lot of partying going on, even some drinking. Maybe not the way that we saw it now. Definitely not getting trash drunk and showing up at somebody's house half naked. But they definitely had a great time. They did drink. They enjoyed parties. He enjoyed himself. But there were also sorrows. He still had the balance of good times. There were miracles. There were people, rejoicing and happy because of the things that was going on. But then there were also times of sorrow, and you can see that in the Gospels, and shows like The Chosen just kind of make that more. It makes it more human than just reading the actual story. But this is why rabbis are kind of cool to me, because they make the story relatable. They make the story relatable, and they make it seem like it's human instead of being something way up here in the clouds. That this is a human book written by humans for humans. You know what I mean? And this is not only how to have a relationship with humans, but also how to have a relationship with the Creator. And so that's why I always say it's not a history book. It's not it's not a law book. It's not a religious book. It's not a spiritual book. It is a guidebook. That's exactly what it is. It's to guide you through this life and guide you in your relationship with humans and in your relationship with the Creator. And if we can get that, then I think we begin to look at the book totally differently than what we've ever seen it. And the relationship between Creator and man to man becomes totally different. Because I look at my own sin. I just want to say this last part because I know I'm talking a lot. I look at my own sin and I justify me. I have sins, I have mistakes I make. I justify me and I'm okay because it's me and I know me, right? I know my heart.
Yeah.
But when it comes to you sinning or other men sinning, it's harder for me to forgive you because I don't know.
Yeah.
But we should be just as willing to forgive our brothers for their shortcomings as I'm able to forgive myself. And that, I think, goes on that next level of loving your neighbor as yourself. How do you love your neighbor? Well, you look at them over the way that you look at yourself. You consider them instead of you. I'm drawing such a blank here, and I'm sorry. You over consider someone else instead of yourself, and you give them the benefit of the doubt, just like you do yourself.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it more of a human thing, and better when you do those things instead of saying, "There's a mouse back there running." Anyway, yeah, he's got mice, people. He's got
That
mice.
was my fan drying my eyes out.
Yeah. Anyway, it's how you connect to humans.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Humanity connecting to humanity. So, that was Troy. You better write that message down. Ask your pastor if you can preach it. Pastor, if you're watching this, Troy's ready to preach that message.
I don't know that he watches them all, but I know he has watched some.
Well,
So
I'm putting that plug in there for him, so hopefully
I'll have to
he feels
make
that one.
note.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, even if you're not preaching, sharing it in Bible study, sharing it with people, just getting down to the nitty and the gritty of the actual word and understanding it on that deeper level. That's the big thing. And understanding that you don't enter the Creator's space until you've applied the blood. That's the huge takeaway there. So the blood must be applied, which is basically repentance, right? You ask Mashiach to forgive you, so you can enter into his space, his presence, and then he can forgive you. You know, and sometimes it's easier for God to forgive us than for us to forgive ourselves.
Yes.
That's the other thing. Any thoughts, Ty? Tyler's a preacher too.
Nope, I'm not a preacher.
False.
I'm not a false preacher either.
That's true. But he is a preacher. Good teacher right there. Great